Greetings fellow gorehounds and welcome back to a Blood Splattered vlog, and if you're wondering why I am back on the webcam setup, well, it went so well last time and it sounded good and it looked good and most importantly, it was really easy to set up, so I figured, why not do this setup from now on? I mean, anything that makes it easier to make videos so I can make them more often is a good thing, right? And with that said, let's move on to the movie that we're here to talk about, and that's 47 Meters Down, Uncaged, the sequel to 47 Meters Down from 2017. Now, some of you might recall, I did a vlog on that original movie back when it first came out, and overall, I enjoyed it even though I had some problems with the last act. And funny enough, despite my enjoyment of the original movie, I was not at all excited for this movie, mainly because the sequel looked like a sequel in name only. It didn't carry over any of the characters from the first one. It seemed to be a completely new scenario with new sharks in new waters, in this case underground in a cave. And overall, it seemed to be going for a completely different tone than the original one had, so every time the trailer aired, I'd be sitting there going, what's the point of this? Which, complete sidetrack, I actually find kind of funny because I rewatched my vlog for the original one to refresh my mind on the original movie and what I felt about it. And it turns out that in that vlog, I was also not looking forward to the original movie, which is kind of hilarious in retrospect because I ended up really liking that movie. And that makes this whole setup here just a little bit like, I don't know, deja vu? But not quite deja vu, for reasons I'm about to get to. But before we get to that, yeah, I went into this movie with really low expectations, and the movie had a lot to prove. So I bet you're wondering now, how did it turn out? Did Guru like it? Did he dislike it? Was he somewhere in between? And this is actually a rare case where I am 100% in between those two emotions. I both liked this movie and disliked it for a multitude of reasons. And it gets even more murky when I start comparing it to the original movie, which again, I really enjoyed despite its flaws. Because I feel like this movie is both better and also way worse than the original movie, and allow me to explain why. But first, the things I liked about the movie, or thought was better than the original. Number one, this movie is way more action-packed. Think of it as the far more action-packed sequel to the reserved original, so kind of like an Aliens to an Alien. Second, I feel like this movie had a far more entertaining and a far more satisfying final act, which means my complaints about the original movie are pretty much gone in this movie. Third, because of the nature of this scenario versus the being trapped in a cage of the original movie, there's far more variety to what happens in this movie, so it's far less repetitive. And fourth, while I do not think this was better than the original movie, I did enjoy the leads in this film, and I did care about them throughout, so I was rooting for them to survive. And fifth, this movie is way more fun than the original movie. Now granted, the original movie wasn't going for fun, so it would have been weird if that one was like super fun, but this one was going for fun, so it is a good thing that it succeeded in that regard. Now, with all those compliments out of the way, it's time for me to talk about what I didn't like about this movie or thought was way worse than the original film. Number one, this movie also centers around two sisters, and I just feel like the sister dynamic was handled way better in the original movie and with way more nuance, whereas this movie, it's kind of painted in broad strokes and doesn't seem to actually amount to much in the rest of the movie. I mean, I like the characters enough to root for them, but it felt like they weren't as developed as they were in the original film. So it's one of those cases where while I was rooting for them to survive, and that's good, I didn't really give two shits about their relationship as sisters and how that develops over the movie, and that's kinda bad. Which is really too bad considering how well they handled that in the original film, but whatever. I guess not everything can be up to par. And then we got my second problem with this movie, and that's that while this movie is way more fun than the original movie, I feel like this movie has a lot more stupid shit happen. Like stuff that completely defies believability. Now granted, the original movie did have shit happen that was really unrealistic, but it did a much better job at immersing you in the environment of the movie so you felt like you were there, so you were able to gloss over some of the more unrealistic stuff in that movie because it just felt so real and raw while you're watching it. This movie kind of fails in the verisimilitude category. You don't feel like you're there with everyone else, even though it's trying to make you feel that way. And because of that, all the really dumb and nonsensical shit that happens really stands out and kind of gets in the way of you being immersed in the story and the experience that the movie is trying to give you. And if you want an idea of what that experience is that it's trying to give you, it's basically trying to combine the original 47 Meters Down with The Descent, that British horror movie about a bunch of people going spelunking and then getting eaten by these blind monsters that dwell in the caves. And this movie kind of has a very similar trajectory, but with sharks. And it tries to evoke a very similar feeling of claustrophobia in action. And I just don't feel it does that as well as the original movie did what it was trying to do. And certainly nowhere near as well as what The Descent did. And my third issue with this movie is that the sharks look a lot worse in this movie than they did the original movie. Like, I remember noting in my original vlog that the sharks in the original movie, despite obviously being CGI, felt real enough that that didn't matter. In this movie, it's the exact opposite. They seem to be so CGI that it takes you right out of the movie so often. Now, that's not to say there isn't effective scares in this movie utilizing the sharks. In fact, quite often, the jump scares and the tension in this movie is really tense, and it does make you jump, but unfortunately, right after the jump, the tension starts to take a nosedive when the shark is actually on screen because they just look so fake and bad. I mean, it's not sci-fi original movie bad, but it's still bad enough for a big screen movie that I was actually surprised that they didn't take a little bit more time to refine it. And especially when you compare it to Crawl, which happened also this year and had really awesome CGI gators. And my fourth problem with this movie is that while it's really good at creating the disorienting feeling of being underwater in a cave with a whole bunch of shark action going on, it's really hard in certain scenes to tell where the characters are, which character is talking, and what's happening. And this problem is a mixture of the editing combined with some of the particle effects happening on screen, whether it's the bubbles or the dust, combined with the characters kind of having similar sounding voices. And also, there's some very obvious moments where the characters have been ADR'd into the movie, so you're seeing a person on screen who's supposed to be the one talking, but their lips aren't moving, but they still sound like they're coming in over the intercom, so you're wondering, okay, is that character supposed to be talking, or is that supposed to be one of the other girls? Because it sounds like her, but now I'm confused. And that happened to me a lot throughout this movie. And it might not happen to you, but considering it bugged me so much, I might as well bring it up anyway, because you should be warned about the potential pitfalls of the film when you go to see it. And my fifth problem with this movie is actually quite simple, and that's that the original movie did a really good job of pushing PG-13 to its limit, and it felt like it worked really well within the confines of what that movie was trying to do. I never felt like I was being cheated out of anything by the rating. Whereas with this movie, considering it was trying to go for something way more action-packed and way more dumb fun, I really felt the PG-13 rating throughout this film, and I really wanted it to just go hard R. I wanted to see the blood and the guts spewing far more than you do. I mean, don't get me wrong, you get some really good after shark bite effects on like people's arms and their back and their legs after they've been bitten, and there's like a wound there that's gushing blood. But that is very few and far between in this movie. I wanted more of that. I kind of wanted the movie, if you're gonna go full Piranha 3D, then go full Piranha 3D. Don't hold back on that shit. Anyway, my fellow gorehounds, I've kind of exhausted everything I can talk about before we get to the spoilers, so to encapsulate everything I felt about this movie, I both liked it and didn't like it, because it doesn't succeed at what it's trying to do, as well as the original movie succeeded at what it was trying to do. And on top of that, if you really liked the original movie and what it did, this movie is a completely different beast and might disappoint you because of that, so be warned. But with that all being said, if you like yourself a big dumb shark movie, you can certainly do worse than this. If you're a big fan of those movies, which I am, I'm a huge fan of Deep Blue Sea, and this movie is way more Deep Blue Sea than it is Jaws, whereas the original movie was way more Jaws than it was Deep Blue Sea, then I recommend you take an afternoon and you go see this as a matinee, because this is a perfect matinee movie. Preferably with friends you can go drinking with afterwards, so that you can collectively make fun of the movie for all the dumb shit that happens. Anyway, my fellow Gorehounds, as per usual, I'll include an Amazon affiliate link in the description below, and if you click that link and buy or rent or pre-order the movie with that link, then I will get a kickback from it. And oh yeah, outside of the shark action, there are no animals hurt in this movie, so don't worry about that. And with that said, let us move on to the spoilers. Alright, so the first thing you'll notice about this movie, which is different from the original 47 Meters Down, is that in this movie, the sisters are mixed race, meaning that they're stepsisters as opposed to blood related. Which at first I was like, that's pretty fucking awesome. You don't really see that kind of dynamic in horror movies very often, so I really want to see what this movie's gonna do with it. And unfortunately, this movie doesn't really do much with it. They just kind of play it off like normal sisters would in any other movie. You have the one sister who's not sticking up for the little sister, and the family that's mad at the older sister for not sticking up for her little sister, and there's really nothing changed by the fact that they're mixed race. And honestly, that wouldn't be as much of a problem. There's something to be said about making movies where race doesn't matter as much as there is about making movies about race specifically. However, that would have been something more interesting than what the movie actually does, which is kind of boring, kind of bland, and doesn't really amount to much more than what they did in the original film. Which is really too bad, because they had the seeds here to do something completely different, and instead, they just kind of went for the safe options. And the next thing you'll notice that is different from the original movie is that in this scenario, in this movie, there's far more people underwater with them than there was in the first movie. In the first movie, you basically had the sisters and everyone that tries to save them. In this movie, you have the sisters, you have the sisters' friends, and you have the dad and his scuba team that are excavating the ruins that they go into when they're not supposed to. So as a result of that, you have a much higher body count in this film than the original one had, meaning this movie has more of a slasher structure than it does the original one, which was like survive at any cost in this small environment structure. And honestly, I like this aspect of the movie. I like the fact that this movie has more people getting eaten by sharks because that's what I pay the good money for. I just wish this movie went for a harder R rating so that we could really see them getting eviscerated. That being said, there is one really gnarly death in which one character gets twisted by the sharks and split in half, and that was pretty fucking awesome. That's my favorite death in the whole film. And that's even when I include the death that was directly homaging Deep Blue Sea, in which the dad dies, and he's giving a rousing speech, and then the speech is like capped off by the shark cutting him off at the end and then pulling him under, very much like how Sam Jackson died in Deep Blue Sea. And the only reason that one wasn't my favorite death is because throughout the movie they had been planting all these seeds with these shark movie references, so when he started giving his rousing speech, my mind immediately went to, okay, this is going to be the Deep Blue Sea scene, and it was, and while it was still glorious, it certainly takes a bit of the punch away when you see it coming. Anyway, earlier in this video, I mentioned that this movie has a lot more dumb shit happen throughout it, and you're probably wondering, what kind of dumb shit am I talking about? And, there's quite a bit to mention. First off, there's a scene really early on which signaled a tone shift for the movie, because up until this point, it was a really serious horror movie, and I thought that's what it was going for, but then this happened, and I was like, oh no, this is gonna be one of those big dumb shark movies, isn't it? And that's what it ended up being. And that's really early on, they encounter a fish in the Mayan temple that they're inside, and they find this fish, and one of them goes to touch it, and then the fish screeches at them like it's above water and making noises. Now granted, I have no idea if that fish actually exists in real life and if it actually makes that noise, but in the movie I didn't buy it, and so as a result of that, it was the first point in the film in which I was taken out of the movie and I was forced to reevaluate how I thought of it going forward. And then the movie started doing more weird things with sound, like for example, there's a scene in which a character is welding underwater, and he's got an underwater stereo that's blasting music, but it doesn't sound like it's underwater. It sounds like it's being recorded from inside a chop shop or a garage, not underwater. But then the dumbest thing is yet to come, because at the very end of the movie, a character shoots a fucking flare gun underwater at a shark's face. And this is the emotional, climactic final fight of the movie, and I'm just sitting there laughing my ass off while it's happening. I am not buying it in the slightest, but it is really fucking cool when it happens. It looks fucking badass. So again, it's stupid, and I didn't buy it, but it was still kind of cool. And this movie is full of that kind of tug-of-war. I love this, but I hate this, but I love this. It's much easier when you really love a movie or you really hate a movie. It's much harder when you're so mixed on it. One thing I'll say, though, is that for all its faults, for the lame CGI, for the kind of copy and paste sister plot, for the really dumb and unbelievable moments, this movie still has a lot of really tense moments of suspense that culminate in jump scares that actually did have me jumping in the theater. And I am not afraid to admit that multiple times I shouted out loud in the theater, and so did like the rest of my crowd, by the way. Like, even though I'm very conflicted on this film, it was still very obviously a crowd pleaser, at least in my theater anyway. And the last thing I'll give this movie is that at the very least, it did not have an ending like the original film had, in which half the ending didn't actually happen. And thank you, movie, for not pulling that same trick twice, because had you done that again, and you had this very same movie with all the same flaws, I probably would have fucking hated it. And because you actually went for more of a straightforward survival action movie with a straightforward survival action ending, I actually was able to enjoy myself despite all my complaints. So thank you, filmmaking team, because it is the same filmmaking team, by the way. I forgot to mention that earlier, but it totally is. Anyway, my fellow gorehounds, as per usual, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and don't forget to ring that notification bell so that you're notified of my videos immediately upon their upload. And also check out my Patreon, which I'll also link in the description below. And remember, if you decide to go the Patreon route, even $1 a month can go a long way. And with all that said, my fellow gorehounds, it's time for me to go do something else. Probably record the last voiceovers I have for my next Blood Splattered Cinema, which we finally got almost everything filmed, and I'm really fucking excited about it. And if you decided to sit through this entire vlog, I'm going to tell you what the next video is about. House by the Cemetery. That's not as big a surprise as it should be, because I already announced it on Twitter a while back, but whatever. You guys who didn't hear that before now get the treat. And with that said, peace out, my fellow gorehounds, and I'll catch y'all later.